I'm really pleased to be chairing this session. Like many other people in this sector, I started out in front of house, but I have also during my career been a visitor experience officer. So I am very aware of the challenges, good things and bad things that happen while you're working in visitor experience, and all of the amazing skills that you can learn while doing it. I am thrilled to have a panel with me today to share their experiences, and I'm now going to ask them to introduce themselves, and I will start with you, Evie.
Hi everyone, so my name's Evie. I'm currently working in the front of house visitor experience team at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. So my path to this role started at the age of 18. So I did my BA in photography, which I completed in 2017. I then graduated and then immediately went on to pursue a master's in curating. So that was 1 year long, but it was actually during my second year of my BA that I decided that I preferred to be behind the scenes rather than as the artist. So I thought studying curating would be an interesting route to go down because it involves a lot of practical skills as well as undertaking a lot of research and learning the history and theory, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I loved my master's. So I graduated a year later in 2018 and began my search looking for museum jobs. So I spent 6 months unemployed whilst undertaking a lot of voluntary roles to kind of build out my CV and sort of seeking that first graduate role really. And then I found my current role in Ashmolean. I've been there 2 years next January.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to be touching on the two aspects of working in visitor experience in front of house. Is often you're doing it at the start of your career and you're looking to make a move into other areas of museum work, which is extremely valid. And we will touch on some things around transferable skills and things like that in this conversation. But what we really also want to make sure we focus on is front of house and visitor experience as a career in its own right. And I'm going to pass on to Anna to introduce herself in that context too.
Hello everyone, I'm Anna. I'm currently a volunteer at The Box as a gallery assistant, which is the museum, the new museum in Plymouth in Devon. And I'm also a collections volunteer down at the Royal Cornwall Museum, but that's been a bit different this year because of COVID, obviously, and lockdown. And at the moment, I'm doing my master's. I'm doing it in heritage management, but actually my path into front of house visitor experience has been a bit of a squiggly one. So it's, you know, I started off as a customer service assistant at the local library in Exeter. And I sort of knew that I wanted to do something in museums and heritage. And at that point, I had no university degree or anything like that. I just had like enthusiasm and customer service experience. And sort of from there, I started sort of an experimental path into museums. So I got a job as a relief museum assistant at the local museum in Exeter, which is the Royal Albert Memorial Museum and Art Gallery. So I was doing that while I was working at the library, which was really good because it meant that I was paid to do that job. So I didn't have to volunteer. And then after that, I saw a position opening at a local National Trust place. And that was for membership, dealing with membership and visitor reception. And actually, I was the third option free of a job that only had 2 places. So actually, they only brought me in because they liked me. And I was sort of in a relief position again whilst I was doing my job at the library. And from there, sort of that opened doors into other areas of work in that place. I think maybe it's a similar experience to some to others, maybe Holly or Evie, that sometimes when you work in a smaller place, you have more opportunities to develop skills and experience in other areas in that place. So from there, I went on to retail assistant, which was like a permanent job. So for me, it was a better job. And then I went on to become a visitor experience assistant for a couple of years. So that was work with volunteer management, interpretation, and also been a duty manager and a key rep. So that was a really real breakthrough, I felt at the time. But the problem is that it was fixed term. So that's another one of the challenges, I think, in jobs, sometimes in front of house visitor experience. But we can talk about that a bit later. But yeah, since then I've decided to go back into education. So I completed my BA, and I'm doing my master's now. But whilst I was doing my BA, I worked as a membership and visitor welcome assistant again, but in a permanent position in another National Trust house. So yeah, it has been brilliant, but yeah, a bit of a squiggly path into front of house and visitor experience jobs.
Thank you so much. I think we're definitely going to come back to some of the more challenging parts of these kinds of jobs, and I think the seasonality and fixed term contracts is definitely going to be something we talk about in a bit more detail. And last but by absolutely no means least, Holly, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, so I'm Holly. I've had, amazingly, I can't quite believe it, 15 years experience working in visitor experience. I'll start from the beginning. So basically, when I graduated, I studied graphic design and specialised in illustration. And all I really knew career-wise was that I wanted to do a master's, and I needed to work to be able to afford it. So I was working in retail and wasn't massively enjoying it. And a job came up in the National Trust to be a ticketing and membership assistant. And I went for it, and I got that basically just because I had customer service experience. And then at the same time, not that long after, the Roald Dahl Museum opened, which was just an incredibly lucky kind of thing to happen. And my parents happened to live quite nearby to that. So again, it was near, and they were recruiting. So I got a job there. And that was also based on the fact that I had customer service experience. I'd done some babysitting. So I had experience working with children, and I liked Roald Dahl books and reading. So yeah, so I managed to get that job. So that was kind of a part-time job. And it was only when I started working there that I sort of thought actually working in museums and galleries might be really good. And I didn't get into the masters that I applied for right away. So I kind of just was keeping working and sort of saving up money and wondering what to do next. And I got promoted to being a duty officer, duty manager at Roald Dahl Museum. Then I managed to get a role doing maternity cover for the visitor services supervisor, and managed to get into my master's. And then at this point, a lot of things all happened at the same time. So I'm going to try and say it as kind of chronologically as possible. So through doing my master's, I got some work experience at the Royal College of Art in the archives. So basically what I found myself doing was trying to get as many opportunities as I could to sort of investigate what there is kind of to do in museums and galleries, because I kind of didn't know anything. I think my only perception was that you maybe had to study history or be an archaeologist to sort of work in a museum. So yeah, so I did that. And then from that, I got another part-time job at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which was project support assistant. So that was kind of very back office role. And then the visitor services supervisor at the Roald Dahl Museum didn't return to her job after her maternity leave. So then I stayed, and once I'd finished my master's, did that full time. Also at the same time, because I studied art, I kind of did quite a lot of workshops and things at the museum. They gave me lots of opportunities to do that. And from that, I got some freelance work being an artist in residence in schools. I did a big puppet project for the Roald Dahl Festival. And then I also did an internship at London Zoo in their events department. And I got some work from that in their interpretation department. And the way that I was managing to do all of these things kind of at the same time was I was taking holiday, and I also got some time off in lieu to do it. So I was kind of being paid for some of the unpaid roles, and also all of my travel was paid for as well by them. So that kind of enabled me to do it. The only thing I'd say is, although it was amazing because I have all of this really wide and varied experience, it was exhausting, and I had loads of nosebleeds at that time for some reason. So I think it was kind of, yeah, just like taking on too much stuff all at the same time, but still incredibly valuable. And I do recommend that if it is like you can learn a lot of stuff about lots of different departments by saying yes to all of the opportunities that you get. And then I became visitor services supervisor and outside events coordinator. So I was managing lots of the storytelling at the Roald Dahl Museum externally, like at festivals. I did a project with Kew Gardens, which was massive for their kind of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory 50th anniversary, which is really good. But then the job changed, and the job at the Roald Dahl Museum, they were going to basically stop doing all of the storytelling, external storytelling stuff. And I started to think, okay, what's going to happen to my job? Because that was quite a big chunk of it. And so then I'll have the visitor services bit, which is fine, but it won't be a full-time job anymore. And fate intervened, and there was a role at the House of Illustration for visitor services manager, which I applied for and got. And yeah, so then I worked at House of Illustration as the retail and visitor services manager for 6 years, which was also really good because I really kind of expanded on everything that I'd already done before. So I was able to do a lot more retail stuff, which I'd done a bit of at the Roald Dahl Museum, and found that actually I could bring in my art and design knowledge and illustration knowledge into that. I was managing volunteers for the first time, so that was new. And I did some venue hire and assisting with public programs as well. So I think something actually that I wanted to get across to people who are not sure about what visitor experience is. I think sometimes people think it's just kind of standing behind a till or standing in a gallery, but it's actually quite varied because you often have to help out other departments, and you're always involved in anything kind of operationally that's going on. And then at this point, I'm actually now redundant. So along with loads of other arts workers, I guess I'm retraining for Rishi or something. I'm definitely not, I'm not doing that. But yeah, I'm kind of exploring any options that come up. And it's been really interesting because weirdly, ever since I've left, I've been asked so much about my career, which is really interesting. So yeah, so I guess I'll pause it there. I'm working on an online illustrators fair at the moment. So if you search at illustrators fair on Instagram, you'll find it in a voluntary capacity. But yeah, so that's kind of where the story ends at this point.
Wow. I think I speak for everyone when I say that. I think what's really interesting, and I think probably represents a lot of careers in this area, is that you do get involved in a lot of different things and a lot of opportunities can come up. I think there is someone in the comment saying that not always are you able to collaborate with other departments, and I think it's probably right to reflect that in some organizations, particularly large organizations, nationals, let's just be upfront about this, particularly in nationals, there is a lot more siloing between visitor services and the rest of the museum. And I think it's right that we acknowledge that, because it is often the case and it can be more challenging. And we're going to come on to some of that later. I think you've all touched on in your intros some bits for my next question. And my next question is, what do you think are the key skills and, if any, qualifications that you might need to be good at this kind of work? And I'm going to come to Anna first.
Hi, I've sort of made a list, but it looks quite sort of conservative, I think. So I think hopefully some of the others, Evie and Holly, will be able to tell a bit more about that. But I sort of put, customer service experience. I thought, to me, at least the way I entered into that sector, it was about previous experience I had volunteered at the library, and then I got a job at the library. So it was a lot around that, and leading on children's events at the library and doing things like summer reading challenge. So, I think it's about being friendly and patient, but obviously I think being a good active listener as well. And I'm just trying to think about transferable skills, because if you're if you haven't had a job in this area and you'd like to have a job in this area, you know, maybe you have transferable skills from retail or hospitality, under the things that have been mentioned already, I think. I think another thing is sort of communication, because you are talking to quite a wide range of people. You could be, you know, talking to small children, or you could be talking to adults and, you know, different community groups, teenagers, you name it. So it's very varied, and it's, you know, you're engaging people with different stories. So, you know, it is quite important that you are very good at communication, and that's a skill you can develop as well. It's not something that you need to have up front, but if you have something, it really helps. And I think it's, you know, sort of teamwork as well, because I think a lot, even if you're working in a small place, you will be probably working within a small team still. So I think teamwork and being sort of proactive, but I think in many organizations you'll find that you'll be working alongside volunteers. So I think that's something that's really good as well, to sort of learn how to work with volunteers. And yeah, just, you know, thinking on your feet. Sometimes I think prioritization and that sort of thing. If you are, let's say, working in admissions, and it's, you know, sort of Easter, it's a busy season, then you need to know what to do first and prioritize your workload as well. And I hate this word, and I'm just going to put it out there, but I do think you need a little bit of resilience. And the reason why I say I hate this word sometimes is because sometimes I think it's used to sort of like, I feel like it's almost exploitative. So, but I do think that because you're dealing with customers, you're dealing with the public, you know, you sort of, after a while, you sort of grow a bit thick-skinned about things that can happen. But again, there is sort of training that you can do around dealing with difficult situations and things like that as well. But I think in terms of qualifications, you know, I didn't have one when I started doing this sort of job. I then went on to study history with English at university level, but I did it because I wanted to do it, and I don't feel like you should have a qualification as such. I think it's more about like the experience you've got, customer service, and I think enthusiasm, sort of, I wouldn't want to say passion, but just interest in the area. So following, you know, if you're interested in museums and heritage, follow organizations on Twitter, on Facebook, on social media, follow networks such as Fair Museum Jobs, Museum Detox, etc. Just keep up to date with things that are happening. But yeah, I think these are just some of my main ones.
I think that's a really brilliant list to start with. And I think I just want to pick up on the point of resilience. I think you're absolutely right that resilience is needed in terms of the day-to-day of dealing with customers, but resilience as a skill for an individual doesn't absolve an organization of like taking care of its staff and having good practices that aren't exploitative. And I think that's where the difference lies. In front of house, someone could just be very angry because they can't find a car parking space, and you need to be able to deal with that. And so there's some resilience involved, but the overall structure of your museum and why don't we have enough parking is a different question that doesn't, you know, you being able to deal with that person doesn't stop there being a wider organizational issue, if you know what I mean. Evie, I wonder what you might want to add about sort of key skills that you would list.
Yeah, so I totally echo Anna's points about communication and resilience. They were on my list for sure. And actually, I've attended quite a few of these sessions this week, and there's been a lot of conversations about transferable skills. I definitely think that's the buzzword of this summit, I think. So it's really, really good that we're talking about that. I also think as well, you know, especially because of the pandemic, going back into work and going back into, you know, the role, it's sort of remaining flexible. I think being flexible is such an important skill to have anyway, but that's really sort of showcased, especially going back. Teamwork as well, that's something Anna mentioned, but definitely I feel like my department and my team have really united throughout this this pandemic, and actually more so than we were before. Our communication's better. You know, we talk about things a lot more. Our training's better, and it's definitely a positive that's come out of a bad situation. I think also as well, like being better and more selective with our time and organisation, I think has also been like a key skill that's come out of this. I think there's really a great deal to show from these everyday skills that can take you a long way. And sort of take you through the sector and beyond. Yeah.
Definitely. I can't think of any job in any museum where the ability to communicate and work well in a team isn't going to be necessary. It's just always, even if you are the only member of staff in a small organization, you're not going to be only talking to yourself all of the time. There's always going to be other people that you need to get involved in. Holly, I wonder what you might suggest as some additional key skills, if there's any we haven't covered.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything everyone said. I kind of wrote a list of sort of personal attributes, because I think, like people are saying in the comments, like, do you need a postgraduate degree and all of that kind of thing? And you really don't. It's much more about like kind of, yeah, being the right person for the job and having maybe had some customer experience previously. And certainly when I'm recruiting, I would look at kind of experience over education, definitely. So I wrote the kind of good personal skills to have, empathy, because you're always having to kind of, one of the things that's important with accessibility is being able to kind of predict what someone's needs are going to be when they come in. So it's being able to understand other people, essentially. Patience, calm under pressure, because stuff is always going to go wrong and you need to be able to deal with it and not kind of run around. Having a sense of humour as well, for also when things go wrong. Just being a nice person, because it's a very kind of people-focused job, people-oriented job. Good at understanding people, and having an interest in the venue, I think, is a good thing as well, because if you go to an interview and you maybe don't have any kind of museum or gallery experience, if you do show that you're genuinely interested in the subjects or whatever it is that that place does or shows, that can really help. And I've also put practical, common sense, and retail hospitality helps. So yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, I think my computer I had a Wi-Fi bug and I missed the end of where you were saying about retail and hospitality experience. I think that's what I missed.
Yeah, no, that was my last bit.
Excellent. No, good. Everyone went on pause and I couldn't check what was happening. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that answers a little bit one of the questions that's been posed in the chat about, would you say that for front of house roles, experience is favoured over postgraduate degrees? And I think, Holly, you've answered that a little bit. It is more complex than that. Some organisations, when you it's all about the job spec. I'm not going to go into reading a job spec now because we're doing a session about that at 7 p.m. that you can sign up for. But there is, it can be quite complex, definitely. I'm going to pose another question from the chat, I think, because we've been talking a bit about the whole 2020 world situation, and people in the chat are a bit worried about if they've been in front of house roles and they're now going to have a gap in their CV. Do you think that is something to worry about, or are people going to be, oh, 2020? Would anyone like to come in on that? Give me a wave. Holly.
Yeah, well, I can't exactly answer the question, because I'd probably say I'm also worried about that as well. But I do think that it's so obvious that, you know, places have had to close, that if someone looking at a job application and you've got a gap says, why have you not done anything? It would kind of be stupid of them to not be understanding. Because yeah, it is that word, unprecedented circumstances. It's a global pandemic. So many people are going to be in this position that if recruiters, they're going to start seeing this, and it's going to become quite normal, I think, for people to have these gaps in their CVs. That's kind of what I'm hoping anyway.
I think probably we'd want to reflect as well that a good employer is going to understand. A bad employer, that's going to be a flag that you should pay attention to. We're all for, you know, thinking about the red flags at fair museum jobs, because they exist and we can't pretend they don't. So you'll be able to read a lot into that, I think, as time goes on. I'm going to ask one of our questions that was submitted in advance, and I wonder if we could talk a bit about opportunities for training and development when you're working in visitor experience. I'll come to Evie first.
Yeah, so luckily the Ashmolean is obviously owned by Oxford University. So we have opportunities for a lot of training, both virtually, which is what predominantly we're doing, but then also elsewhere. So I know at the moment, whilst we've been closed for the month, we've had opportunities to go to the other sites in Oxford, like the Botanic Gardens or Pitt Rivers, so the other museums, which has been really, really useful. I didn't undertake that for my own reasons, but I know from people that have done it, they've got a lot out of it and sort of seen things from other perspectives, so especially the gardens, because they've been able to stay open, you know, just getting a different outlook on how they've run things and bringing it back. So it's all training, both for the person, but actually then to bring that back to our department and talk about it, how we can then make things better from their experiences, if that makes sense. Yeah, I must admit, actually, whilst we were off the first time during the lockdown, we had a lot of weekly training that was issued out to us via our managers and via our, you know, department leaders. So that was really, really, really useful. That was both through the university and through things like LinkedIn. So yeah, it's definitely something that is there and is, you know, accessible for everybody. So definitely.
That's really great. It's really good to hear that your organization were supporting the front of house team in that time, because it was, being furloughed is hard, and it's a struggle when, you know, in this sector, a lot of us is part of our identity, and there's a lot to kind of unpack there, definitely. Anna, I might come to you thinking a bit about training and development as well.
Of course. I'm trying to remember when I was in my first sort of role in a museum in England at the Royal Albert Memorial Museum in Exeter. I think there was a lot of training in sort of like customer care, but I think there was, what I found really interesting, training that we had directly working with collections and curators and people like that, so we could actually understand better what the exhibition was about. So I remember there were a lot of workshops and talks, sort of like late nights and things like that, where we would have a lovely tour of that exhibition and really delve into it. And that was really good. And it's sort of, then you're in touch with other departments and you can sort of understand how things operate in the museum or a heritage site as well. So that's quite interesting. But I think particularly because I was for almost 5 years with the National Trust, I sort of go back to that experience because they do have quite a structured program of development and training. So, you know, from all the basics in retail, how to promote membership, which then is something that you can use for many other sort of things you do in front of house, because it's about promoting certain, you know, a vision and values as well. And, you know, sort of even the basics, like how to operate a till and things like that. I remember when we changed the till, we were like in this course for like 3 days on how to operate the new till. But these are, you know, these are important experiences as well, not just sort of like the wider stuff, but the day-to-day. And then I think for me, it was really interesting with working with volunteers. We had a lot of training around that. So we had, you know, sort of leading change training. So you do that with volunteer groups and staff alike, and dealing with difficult situations sort of training as well, and trying to understand where people are coming from. And I think we had a lot of sort of interpretation training as well. So I remember spending this day sort of just talking to house stewards and different sort of more like collections based people on how to interpret things and how to have a good team with you front of house as well. So I think with the National Trust, I can remember, you know, it's part of, even if you are fixed term or seasonal, let's say, there is a number of training opportunities that you have to do as part of your role. And if you see something that interests you from the sort of like newsletters they send, you can ask to be sent to relevant training as well. So I think that's, for me at least, it worked really well, because, you know, you have these really great opportunities of talking to other people and really delving into the skills you need for that role.
Thanks, Anna. I will come on to Holly because I wonder if you might have a different perspective on this coming from a different kind of type of museum where you've been doing this kind of work. So what training and development were you accessing?
It's really variable, actually, between the different organisations I've worked for. So some have been really good and have had a lot of resource to put into training for front of house. Like people have come in from outside to do accessibility training or diversity training or sort of basic customer service skills. And then other places, they kind of assume with visitor experience that it's something you can just learn on the job and expect the kind of managers or supervisors to do all the kind of on the job training, which like you can kind of get away with that. But I think it is good to have more structured training, like what's just been mentioned. So the National Trust sounds really good for that. I also, my kind of customer service sort of knowledge and skills actually probably came from when I worked at Marks and Spencer, because they were really big on really good customer service skills and did really structured training. And I still, that's kind of where I base all of my kind of knowledge on that, really. But the advice I would give to people is if anyone ever offers you any training, say yes to it, even if you think it doesn't really sound relevant, because it always will be in some way, or it will be useful kind of in the future. Yeah, dealing with difficult people is a good one as well. And like stuff like first aid training, if your organisation offers that, that's really good, because some jobs, they'll put that on the job description, saying you either must have first aid qualification or be prepared to do it. It's all that kind of sort of operational type stuff, like knowing about fire safety and all of that kind of thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. Don't shy away from food hygiene, health and safety, risk assessments, and fire safety, because a lot of people in other jobs you might go for will not want to do that and not know about it. So it's definitely jump at those kinds of training, especially because they're so, a lot of people just aren't into it, and then you will be different, a different candidate for it as well. And I think if you get offered formal first aid training, something to bear in mind is that a certificate in first aid training lasts for 3 years. So you can then take that somewhere else. If this is a stepping stone for you, then it's really doing first aid training. I've never had someone see that I've done first aid and go, oh, that's ridiculous. Every organization has a legal obligation to provide first aid for their employees. So you're always going to get a little bump, even if it's not, really obvious. I will pick up on something else from the chat. And so this question is, how can you stand out in an interview for a front of house role? And I will preface by replying directly to Ellie, you asked this question. If this happens again, make sure you do ask for feedback from that interview and press them to give you useful feedback. And don't be afraid to ask the question, what was the right answer to this situation or to this question, so they can tell you what they were wanting to hear. But generally speaking, who would like to come in on how can you sort of stand out in an interview for this type of role? Anna.
I think for me, it will sound a bit cheesy, but I think I've always sort of tried to be myself, and I'm quite sort of bubbly and happy usually. But I think trying to be yourself, but I think in a more sort of a practical thing is that I think I always try to give examples of when I've done things that they're asking for. So I always sort of, anything I do, I sort of write down all the sort of skills and things, and I always try, it's a bit like that start thing they do for CVs, and I think there's probably been Fair Museum Jobs session on CVs and interviews and things like that. But I think it's being yourself, but it's also trying to think really hard about examples of when you did things like that. And if you don't have examples, you can put that as something that you like to learn or develop through the job as well. For me, it always worked, but I do think now about, with like the competition that there will be, in the next sort of coming months. And I think that's probably going to be more of a, an important question to ask yourself, and just trying to think about that. But I don't know if Evie or Holly have sort of better answers to offer.
No, I completely agree with what you said about being yourself. I think that's probably the best thing you can do in an interview. You've got to be authentic and bring what you have. I do think as well, showing that you've done your research on the place that you're looking to work to also does help. That would be my little bit of advice maybe as well.
Holly, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was looking for the question on the chat, and I saw someone else had also said that they hadn't got through because they didn't have enough experience kind of managing emergency situations. And I think, just to give background on that, the reason people ask that question is because they need to know that you're going to be calm if something does go wrong, like if a fire alarm goes off, or some other emergency, I don't know, you have to evacuate the building or something. And so you might not have had to have done that in a previous role, but you might be able to give examples of when you have had to deal with something stressful, which could be a personal experience in your life. And it doesn't have to be something really big. It's just to show that you kind of, something bad is happening and I'm okay, I can deal with it and process it and kind of be very kind of matter of fact about it. It is about demonstrating that you can be quite practical, I think, in your answers to questions. Yeah.
Something that's actually always got me a nod of approval in interviews when talking about emergency situations is saying, well, I'm sure that you have an emergency procedure for this and probably a risk assessment, but here's how I think I would roughly approach the situation. Because that means you're acknowledging that you know there's going to be planning that's already been done, and that you would know enough to follow whatever had been written, but that you would be a calm, useful presence, not like running around chasing your own tail kind of situation. There's a lot of other things going on in the chat around training. So thank you everyone who's sharing resources. I'm going to come to another question where we're going to talk about maybe some of the challenges a bit as well. So what would you say is the most difficult thing about working in visitor experience or front of house? And I'm going to come back to Holly on this one first.
So there's kind of there's two things. There's one which is the kind of day-to-day thing that anyone who works in a public facing role in any kind of place faces, which is obviously having to deal with rude people being horrible to you and nasty. Sort of things like, especially if you work in a museum that's aimed at children and families, clearing up sick and stuff like that. But I think there's also kind of wider things where it can be quite difficult as a department to be recognised as kind of important within the structure of an organisation. And that seems to be, and this is from talking to other people as well, like everywhere seems to have this issue of a bit of a divide between back office and front office. And even like places even try and kind of sort of stop that from happening by making sure they involve everyone in decisions and that kind of thing. And I think that sometimes it stems from the people who kind of have the resources and the money don't really understand what the front of house roles involve, which means that front of house is often the department which gets cut if there has to be kind of financial cuts and things, which is obviously something that we've seen with the pandemic as well. But just in normal times, I've found that, because people are a bit like, oh, but it's just some people like standing in different rooms, so surely we can do with less of them. And it's all the complexity of like, well, actually, people need to go to the toilet, or they need a lunch break, or they might get called to go and do something else. So it's I think what we need is to get other departments to recognise the skills and the experience that you actually need to work in front of house and why it's important. Because literally none of these places could exist or open without visitor experience.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. I will just give a quick shout out now to front of house museums. If you haven't heard of them, they do a lot of campaigning on the role of front of house and its importance. So you can go and find them on Twitter. I think they do a lot of work trying to advocate in this area. I think you're right to pull through as well that this year a lot of cuts are disproportionately affecting front of house teams and learning in a similar vein, really, I think, for similar reasons. And we know that the impact of that is more affecting already marginalized voices in museums, which is going to result in a completely different looking sector in a year's time, which I think everyone is sort of, there's a lot of denial about what that looks like, I think. I will come to Evie now. Would you like to reflect on some of the challenges that you experience in your role?
Yeah, I suppose for me, it's kind of more related to slower career progressions for me. And actually, for someone who has done 2 degrees and still trying to get those roles both internally and externally, it's yeah, it's a bit disheartening sometimes when you don't, you know, when you get in those rejections. But you know, that's why I think, you know, places, you know, spaces like fair museum jobs is, you know, really important, because, you know, they sort of do their bit to help aid us in that journey to find those jobs. So just a little shout out to you guys for helping me out. It's also nice the community around it as well, and you know, it sort of helps you feel like you're not the problem because other people are going through it as well. So yeah, I think it's just important to remember that, you know, your time will come and you've just got to keep going, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point, and it comes back to some of the issues we've talked about the kind of lack of value of front of house skills. I think that's why it can make it quite hard to progress either in a front of house path or into other areas of museum work, is that not always, a lot of organizations aren't valuing front of house as much as they should do. Anna, would you like to reflect on some of the challenges that you've experienced?
Yeah, I think thinking about some of the challenges I experienced in the role, I think it's quite physically and mentally demanding, and I think that's again something that maybe sometimes when there is that very clear front of house and sort of back of house divide, that shouldn't be the case. People don't realize how challenging it is to actually work with the public. And I think something that I picked up from the Museums Association conference, I think a couple of weeks ago, is that they were talking a lot about sort of emotional labor and the value of emotional labor, and it touches upon resilience and a lot of other things that we discussed here. But I think it's just people don't realize, you know, you can be on your feet all day, you know, talking all the time, and it's, you know, it's just about sort of regulating your own emotions and people's expectations as well. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. It is quite demanding, and it's sort of, you get home and you're like exhausted sometimes, you know. But I think as well, it's sort of sometimes the flexibility that is required. And if you think about, you know, I think a bit like Holly, that at one point I was working 6 days out of 7, you know, just continuously. And, you know, I didn't really have weekends off. Sometimes I didn't have evenings off because it was just sort of extra events and things happening, and you have to set up and, you know, pack everything at the end. And yeah, I think that's quite challenging as well. And I feel like sometimes other roles in museums don't require that much flexibility on your own, sort of almost like your personal life. Yeah, I think that was quite hard, and sometimes not being able to take annual leave when you want, and sometimes depending on where you work, they'll be like, oh no, this is a really busy period, we don't really like people taking annual leave for that period, and you think, oh, you know, I really need some time off. So I think, yeah, some of the challenges when you're in the role already.
I think especially thinking the job, because the job is physically and mentally quite demanding, that inability to take the leave that you should and have the time that you need to kind of recover from that, I think is incredibly important. And it's not always it's not fairly applied, I think, definitely. From what you're saying, that's definitely true. I wonder if my colleague Tom is here, because what I would just like to do, if you is ask you to reflect, because this summer was your first experience of working front of house during the recovery from COVID. And I wonder if you could just share with us some of the things that surprised you when you were put into front of house this year for the first time.
Thanks, Louise. That's a difficult question. I don't think it was that surprising. But it was really interesting just to see the visitors interact with the museum exhibits that I'm responsible for in a curatorial sense. And that I think just observing their dwell time on things, that things that I'm really excited about, they were just glancing over, and then things that I find really boring, they were finding fascinating, and especially the stuff that the children like as well. And I think that was really insightful as well, because my museum has to please everyone, not just audiences who think like me and have you know, a strange, almost obsessive interest in aircraft, which is what I curate. So yeah, that was really interesting as well. And I do admit I was a bit apprehensive as well to start with, because I had a lot of customer facing experience from the supermarket industry, and I've not been in that industry for about 8 years now, and I think I can only remember the horrible side of it. And it was really nice to be reminded that actually 95, maybe 99% of the public are absolutely lovely. But yeah, it's definitely something I'd recommend everyone do at least once in a while. And I hope to do a few more shifts as well. You know, moving forward, try and do it on a seasonal basis. Just check in with how visitors are responding to the latest developments.
Thanks, Tom. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but I thought it'd be interesting to kind of see that reflection. And someone else in the chat has suggested that idea of all members of staff having the responsibility to do some time in front of house during the year. And I think if the trustees of the British Museum, even Mary Beard off the telly, can do a front of house stint, do you really have an excuse in your organisation for not doing it? I think probably not. I want to reflect on actually a question that I didn't plan in advance, but I'm really interested to know from my panel. What have you been able to get involved in, or what event has happened that was surprising to you? Could be in a good way, could be in a bad way. I'll let you think for a second. If anyone knows the answer straight away, please do unmute yourself and go for it. I think I'll share mine, because I shared this in the small museums panel earlier in the week. And I think one of the things that surprised me most about working in visitor experience is how much I would get to know how to identify different types of animal poo as I was clearing them up from the site. Not something that is in any job description, but definitely something that I did a lot of in terms of thinking about cleaning various items you may find, shoplifted things dumped in a bin, personal items, I'm gonna euphemistically say. It was a site with a garden, so yeah. Anna, anyone else want to share any of their surprises? Anna.
How important the toilets are, you know, with the toilets. I don't know how many books you could write about it, but it's just crazy how, you know, you think about sort of, oh yeah, I'll engage visitors, I'll take people on tours, and I'll be a lovely guide and things like that. And then you don't think that most of the feedback you get is about toilets. It's just, yeah, that was a big surprise, and how important they are. And it's sometimes it's the small things. So I think actually with the skills, I was going to say attention to detail is quite important for this sort of a role as well. But yeah, sometimes about the small things, and sometimes if people had a great time but one thing really bothered them, that's all they'll remember from their visit. So yeah, sometimes it's thinking about things that you wouldn't think necessarily that are important.
Definitely. Any other reflections from Evie or Holly on this topic? Both. Yeah, Holly, and then we'll come to Evie.
I think the thing that I've been kind of surprised by is kind of learning and gaining an ability to deal with difficult people, because in any other normal situation, and especially if you tell people who don't work in customer facing roles, sometimes the stuff that you've had to kind of deal with, people are really shocked. And I found that it's actually really helpful in day-to-day life, because something might happen, like someone's being annoying on the bus or something, and you know how to deal with that situation. Or if someone is being rude to you, you can deal with it in a much more calm way than you might do otherwise. And that's been quite beneficial, I think, just in life in general.
And Evie?
So one thing that's really sort of shocked me is how people don't like the kind of adventure of being in a museum, and how they need to know where they are and their kind of exit, and they need to know where things are. In terms of, I don't know, when I go to a museum, I almost like getting lost. You find the best things, I think, when you don't have a plan and don't have a structure. So that's quite something that we've all found, sort of working in front of the house, how much people want to have a map and to have like a designated structure almost to their visits. Yeah, quite interesting.
I think, yeah, that's really interesting reflection. I think often we all assume that people are going to experience a museum how we want to experience a museum, and it's only when you're in front of house that you realize, like, actually some people just come straight in, they go to the one thing they want and they're done, and it can be quite interesting on that, I think, as well. I'm going to ask another question now, and that question is, if you could just give one piece of advice to someone who was thinking about working in front of house or visitor experience, what piece of advice would you give them? And I'm going to start with Anna.
Gosh, this is a tough one, because you want to give more than one piece of advice, but I think especially in the days, in the current situation that we live in, I think just transferable skills. If you really want a job in this sort of area, really think hard, because I think it's quite interesting if you get a job description and start looking at essential skills and things like that. You'll be surprised to how much you already do, but not necessarily in a museum setting. So just really sort of dig deep. And I think with people maybe trying to not being able to find a job in the museum at the moment and having to sort of go outside the sector for a while, just think about that and don't get disheartened.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's excellent advice, especially at the moment. And I think a couple of people in the chat were saying they were currently working outside museums in other customer service roles, and absolutely do that. It is transferable and it will still be useful to you. Any role is going to be useful to you, really, where you're interacting with other people. Evie, I wonder what advice you would give somebody.
I think always feedback to your managers or your people in charge. That they want to know what it's like, especially at the moment, with things changing so dramatically. Constantly feedback how things are working and how things aren't working. Just keep having those conversations, because they ultimately, you're the ones that are seeing it front of on the front line, so to speak. I mean, I hate that phrase, but you're the ones sort of on the floor seeing it all happen. So definitely always feedback, because you want to get your thoughts put out there, don't you? And hopefully something will come of it eventually. And yeah,
I think that's definitely a really good point. Remembering that you in your role are the best advocate for what the visitors want is incredibly important, because you're exactly right what Evie says. You are there and you see them and how they interact with your site. And someone in the chat has pointed out that, for example, building accessibility is not in front of house's hands most of the time, but you have to deal with it because you are there. And because you are there, yeah, as Marley says, you are the face of the organization when you are in front of house and visitor experience. You are the people that are seen by the visitors. So you have to deal with that, but that gives you the power to make sure that you put your suggestions and improvements in. Holly, I wonder what advice you would give somebody.
Yeah, I would say go for it, like, because lots of people have been worrying about kind of qualifications and that kind of thing, but it really isn't something to worry about. It is much more about kind of transferable skills, as everyone keeps saying, and like any job where you're customer facing, that's really, really helpful, because it shows you know how to deal with people. Retail, hospitality, anything like that is really good. So people who are worried about being kind of outside of the sector and are working other roles, I think you really don't need to worry. I think like when I see that kind of thing on someone's CV, I definitely see it as a positive. And I just actually, I remembered something for the previous question, which is a bit more humorous, which is, that surprised me, is how many people think that fictional characters and places are actually real. So when I was at the Roald Dahl Museum, I had someone say, but I thought there was a chocolate factory. And we kind of thought there'd been like an event with some chocolate decorating stuff on TV. So we were like, oh, no, that was just like a workshop thing that we were doing. And she was like, no, I've seen it. There's a chocolate factory. So yeah, so stuff like that can happen. And that's quite surprising and kind of nice in a way.
Yeah, that feels like a good and bad thing at the same time.
Yeah.
And thinking about how big the Roald Dahl Museum site is, jamming a chocolate factory in there would be impressive.
Exactly.
Thank you. I want to end on a positive note before we wrap up. We've just got 2 minutes to go. And I wonder if you could tell me what you think is the best thing about working in this area of museum work. Evie, I'll come to you first.
So for me, it's undoubtedly working like within my team and kind of working with like-minded people stretched over so many different cultures, so many different areas of interest, you know, with degrees, without degrees, you know, it's just so diverse. And the conversations that we have, you know, it really is the team that makes the job what it is. And, you know, we all kind of really miss each other at the moment. So it's going to be good when we go back next week. So yeah, the team.
Excellent, thank you. Someone in the chat said that they think the best thing is that every day is different, which I think is a really lovely thing to think about. And yeah, do feel free to share your best things in the chat as well. Holly, I'll come on to you. What's your best thing?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's definitely the people in your team, because you build up a really great sense of camaraderie. And loads of people make friends with people who, when they move on to different jobs, they stay in touch with. And yeah, every day is different. You also get to meet loads of really interesting people, because the public, you never know kind of who they are or where they're from, and sometimes they tell you really incredible stories. And also just being around all of the kind of collections and the artwork and all of that kind of thing has been like a massive reason why I've really liked working in this industry, because I've got to kind of learn so much stuff about different artists and people, and see different exhibitions and talks and all of that kind of stuff that I might not have accessed otherwise. Yeah.
Excellent. And Anna, the last word, the last best thing from you.
Yeah, I agree with all that's been said. People, the stories you get to know and you get to share and you get to learn as well that people share with you. But I think it can be quite a rewarding role. So, you know, I think sometimes you have your bad days and you think back to that one moment that a visitor said something really nice to you, and you were able to, you know, sort of touch their lives and actually change something in their day even. So yeah, I think it's the rewarding bit that sort of keeps us going as well.
Fantastic. That is a perfect note to end on. And I'd like to really thank my panel for their time today. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone in the chat who's been supporting each other, sharing their stories. I know working in front of house can be a big test on your personal resilience, especially at the moment. So I hope those of you who aren't in your museums are able to go back soon, and we'll be welcoming visits again, I hope. And thank you again to my panel. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. See you soon.